my workshop rooms work, and it was set up for exams. So then we rushed around, we moved all the tables, and then I went down again and I opened up the PowerPoint, and the AV was turned off, and then Fred makes a call. Oh yeah, there was some flooding and the AV network's completely destroyed in that building. So then he ran off, checked his timetabling system, and here we are. And I'm pretty sure that that happens to 1,000 different people in 1,000 different institutes every single day. Would that be fair to say? Cool. But it's good problem solving. So we are going to do an interactive workshop. You may have participated just recently in a survey that I sent out, and I really appreciate the fact that you all participated in that. We got around about 30 institutions to respond, and probably around about 24, 25 who got all the way through. So you have that data. I've given it back to you because it's your survey. So you can do with that survey as you see fit. Today's workshop is coming from that survey. So we're going to do a number of SWOT analysis, which you've all probably done before, but it's worthwhile just touching base on what a SWOT analysis is and why we do it. Primarily, it's because it's simple, but it's very powerful. I'll go through the data that we looked at. I'm not going to go through every single question, but I'm going to do a couple of cross tabulations where you can see what one answer looks like compared to another answer. And we'll look at 3 particular topics that we're going to workshop. Now, I know there are a few more people coming along, but the group sizes are quite nice at the moment, so we won't do any table consolidation yet, but if you feel lonely, we can move you. And then we'll look at a couple of tools for analysing after you've done your workshops, after you've done your SWOT analysis. We're not going to solve any problems today. I think that's the first thing that you should be aware. We can't solve problems in a workshop like this, but what we can do is knowledge share, and we can case study share, and we can look at what other institutions are doing that works, and we can look at what other institutions are doing that doesn't work. You can then take away all of that information and think about it when you get back to your institution. So that's really how we're going to approach this workshop. So a really quick overview on SWOT. You've done these before, but it's just useful to think about it in a way that is institution-wide. So, you know, when we're talking about strengths of your teams, you already come with a group of skills and capabilities, and those skills and capabilities will apply to the questions that we're going to ask today. You also have a group of customers that you work with. I bumped into 3 today. Facilities management, the AV team and the timetabling team. And I consider myself in this situation, I guess the teaching staff, which is a bit weird. The resources that you have, so you have resources like syllabus, so you have resources like your team, culture as well. When you look at weaknesses, what is it you think that your team, so other teams do better than you? So is the fees team in your institution really, really good at communication? What generates the most complaints? What processes are you thinking about that you can improve on? So we talk about weaknesses. The opportunities, and this is where I think the excitement for me comes out of a SWOT analysis, is how can you apply your strengths to those weaknesses? So how can you turn something that you do really well and apply it to something that you're not doing very well and turn it into an opportunity? You've already seen some examples of technology changing the way you do business, and I think that's really exciting for those teams that are going through that journey. And in the world that we live in, of course, technology is constantly changing, and we need to move with that and leverage off new technology to help us do our job. And then finally, threats. So in, I guess, the tertiary education sector, we can have internal threats and external threats. So an external threat is a cap to Commonwealth supported positions. That is a threat to a university, and of course that impacts down to you at the timetabling level. An internal threat might be a faculty restructure, because you have to rethink about how you deliver the timetable to those particular schools that are restructured. So just some things to think about. So this is some of the responses that came out of the survey. So what, I mean, this is always very interesting to me because I'm just a geek. But what I found here was that in Australia and New Zealand and one Asian university, three quarters of us are using an external system to help students allocate to classes. Now when I say allocate, I could mean class registration and it could mean class selection. We're moving towards the words class selection because we think class allocation takes away the agency from the student. The university is taking control, so we're moving to that term, but it's all the same. And class registration is a common term as well. And then one quarter of universities or tertiaries are using an in-house system to allocate themselves, allocate their students to their classes. On the other side of that is how do tertiary education sector institutions enable their students to allocate. So a third of them are letting their students select by preference. Nearly 2/3 are doing it through a first come, first served approach. We call it direct, but it's first come, first served. It's a race situation. Students just have a race to pick the classes that they want. So as I talk through these, I want you to start thinking about how you can start applying the SWOT analysis tool to these responses, because your institutions are tied up in these responses. So what we have is 3/4 have a third-party allocation system, and we can be a little bit agnostic about that, but for the vast majority of us, we know it's Allocate Plus, but we don't need to focus in on what the system can do, but it is useful to acknowledge that. And then on the other side, 2/3 are using a race situation. So when we compare that, what we're seeing is that the universities that have an in-house allocation system only have a direct allocation method, because they don't seem, perhaps I'm making an assumption here, they don't have the capability within their allocation system to manage preferential allocations. So again, thinking about a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Any thoughts on this so far? That's fine, I'll keep on going. Your chance will come. This slide, what this one looks at is how do you rebuild your timetable and how do you rebuild your timetable? So the first one is, do you rebuild it or do you roll it? And in the Australasian environment, for the most part, universities and other tertiary sector institutions rebuild their timetable every time. Not many people roll their timetable. But there is a group of people who are doing a mix of it. So they're rolling their timetable and they're rebuilding as they go. Fair call. Then, if we think about how do you deliver your timetable, half of us are doing it term by term, and more or less the other half are doing it annually. So we all know there are multiple ways for you to build your timetable and deliver your timetable. And that's what the survey says. So that's good. And when we cross those together, what this shows is that institutions which deliver an annual timetable are still likely to rebuild it. So just because they're delivering the entire year's timetable in one go, they're still rebuilding it as they go. They don't just roll their timetable as part of delivering it annually. Now, I had to write a lot on this slide because it makes my head hurt. But the first pie graph is nice and simple. So can your students enroll and select their units at the same time, or select their classes at the same time? Half of the institutions in Australia can, and half of the institutions cannot. So when you open in October for enrolment for the next year, half of those universities, straight away, those students are selecting their timetable, they're selecting their classes, they know what they're doing. And the other half, there's a gap. It might be a gap of an hour, it might be a gap of a week, it might be a gap of a couple of months. So at ACU, it's a gap of a couple of months. Now, I actually have to read this because it makes no sense to me. All right, this one on the left-hand side. What this is saying is that blue line, nice, beautiful bell graph, those are the universities that cannot enrol and allocate at the same time. And the orange one is those universities that can enrol and allocate at the same time. And straight away what I'm seeing is that the universities where you can't allocate your classes at the same time tend to deliver their timetables earlier, but their students can't do anything until later. But those, am I doing your head in yet? No, I think I understand why they're doing that. So they deliver their timetable and they give it to their students to look at. And they get to look at it, and they get to look at it, and they get to look at it. And then eventually they get to allocate into it. And so those universities tend to release their timetable earlier. And the other group of universities saying, well, we know that when we deliver our timetable, our students will be able to allocate to it immediately. So we have the luxury of delivering our timetable later because they can allocate to them at the moment of timetable release. And that's what this messy non-bell curve looks like. Is that this group of universities here are allocating their students just before semester. They've opened their enrolments way back in the past, but they're allocating just before semester starts. Okay. So I'm talking about all this because I want to give you the context that your university sits within. Because your university will do it the way that suits you. And now you can see that other universities are doing it in different ways. Some of them are doing it your way. But this is where we start to think about a SWOT analysis. For us at ACU, we release our timetable twice a year. We release it in November for semester 1, and we release it in June for semester 2, and all the other things that go around it. We open our enrolments in October the year before. But our students can't get into our timetable for a month, and then they can't allocate to it for another 2 or 3 months until February. And so we've set up this situation where our students aren't able to do the things that they want to do. And so when we're looking at this, we're saying, well, we think there's a problem here. We want to enable our students to be able to receive their timetable, allocate to their classes, plan their whole year, allocate for the whole year, and then we'll talk about all those problems that we know are going to be problems, changes, uncertainties. We'll fix those things. But from a high level, what we want to do is give our students their timetable for the year and they can plan their life. What we also want to do is give them a preferential choice because in our experience, the direct allocation method sets up an inequity because you get lucky if you get in. And we have no understanding if people's choices are being met because it's a race. So we think, and we may be wrong, but we think that a preferential allocation approach will give students better choices. Now, we understand that universities who have had preferential allocations are moving to direct, but we also understand that universities have direct allocations are moving to preferential. And it's just a natural change in the work environment. That's just what happens. And everyone's doing it because we think that they can get an advantage on everybody else. Why we're doing a SWOT analysis on this is I think that we've been really lucky in Australia working in timetabling for the last few years because we've been working in a growth environment. The demand-driven system has meant that our universities have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. That's a good problem to have. From a timetabling perspective, perhaps not, but it is actually a really good problem to have because it means institutions have more cash. We're about to go into contraction. The demand-driven system has stopped. And large sections of the population in Australia who wanted to go to university but couldn't before the demand-driven system have now gone through. So that pool of people that we've been able to call into universities in the last few years have now got their degrees and they've moved on. So we start looking at preparation programs, how do we grow our postgraduates, how do we grow our international cohorts, and how do we attract and retain high school leavers. And in my opinion, the timetable has a component of that. It actually influences it. Alrighty, so I have talked and I've given my opinions on things, but that's okay. It's now going to be your chance. So we're going to run 3 SWOT analysis. And what I recognise is that when we do these sorts of workshops, it can get loud. And so we need to be mindful of that so that we don't overwhelm everybody. You've already mixed yourselves into tables which are not your institutions. And I'm going to do a little bit of consolidation. Can I grab the 2 of you and move you over here? Do you guys want to join this table here? You guys grab that table there. And that'll do. Fantastic. So what I'll ask you to do, and I'll give you a set of instructions, is divide your first piece of paper into 4 quadrants. Put a little number 1 at the top of it, and then strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. And the first SWOT analysis we're going to do is the difference between preferential allocations and direct allocations. Now, some of you will do it one way and some of you will do another. And at the end of that, we'll do a quick share, and then we'll move on to the next one. Do you have questions? No. Go for it. Do you want the SWOT rules back up? Okay, so the first one is preferential versus direct. Here you go. Some useful questions for you to ask are on the screen right now.
We timetable annually but have a 2 sort of session release.
Yes.
And we open up about 4 weeks before.
Similar to what we do.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's sounding exactly.
And you do it direct or preferential?
Direct.
Okay. And did you stagger or do you go all at once?
We go all at once. We've just started, so
okay.
I'm still getting my head around it.
You'll get some learnings from that. Yeah. Probably your student centre will be the most overwhelmed place.
Yes.
That's where the benefit of staggering comes in. Because your inquiry management is actually, this is a threat to your allocation system, is how do you inquiry manage? And if you do a big bang all at once, all your students want to ask a question all at once. So we see that as a threat to allocations, a smooth experience, and we stagger because of that.
So we...
But I don't want to say what my threats and weaknesses are, but I'm pretty sure that...
Yeah. Exactly, because we just have to manage. So in session 1 we opened up and just went...
Burko. Yep.
And we got a lot of feedback.
Yep.
And so session 2 we had a team, like they had a team set up, or, they're working together in Skype, testing, checking, making sure everything was going. We had a matrix.
So it sounds like a strength that's come out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you actually learnt from your previous experience.
We really did. And this time, I was in a meeting the other day and they just said, we haven't noticed a dip in the emails and the phone calls and all that sort of stuff.
Inquiry management's a really critical aspect of allocation. Doesn't matter how you do your allocations or what system you use. If you don't have a pathway for student inquiries to be managed quickly, you'll find that there's a problem and you'll get bad feedback.
Social media went nuts, and this time social media was just almost nothing. So we learned a lot.
Okay, well there you go. And what about yours?
We use student allocator.
Yep.
And so I guess we open out, we have 3 terms. And we only open student allocator 2 weeks prior to the term start date.
Yep. And that's okay, like it's a legitimate thing to do. Everybody does it differently, but if you were to think about some strengths and weaknesses about opening it 2 weeks before your terms, what would that be?
I know some of the students aren't happy with it because they feel it's not enough time to, work commitments and stuff like that.
So it's a planning issue, is the weakness there. That's fair. Okay. Keep on working through those. Yeah, good.
What's the other 2? So you had direct and preference.
The other one is forced, where you say you don't have a choice and we're just going to give it to you.
Are we doing that after?
We will do that after. So we'll gather this one first. Don't need to rush ahead. Just keep on working on this one. That's right. Yep. Thank you. So what were the things that came out of your SWOT analysis? What did you decide that, well, we're doing really well, we're not doing so well, maybe we've got some opportunities?
Okay, so ours was a bit different because there's only 2 institutions here. We come from different roles, so a bit different. Because we had got the direct approach, so we said that some of our strengths were that we could aim and we had more time to do a clash-free timetable, and students can self-allocate so they can choose their preference. We can kind of use our wait lists and stuff like that to try and work out where the issues are with the timetable. I can't read that, so.
It was what was it, 3 months?
That was, yeah, from the different, do you want to explain that?
Which part?
So
Oh, okay. It's great to be able to show students the timetable early on so they can start looking at it and have time to make a preference selection. And then later on, you open it up once you've allocated them a class, and if there's anything they don't like, they can either select another class if available. If not, then we have a swap system where students can actually request a swap and matches them up if they finds potential swaps automatically. So less work for the students and less work for us.
Is that swap system in Allocate? Is that the new swap system? Yep. Okay. Cool. I'm going to move over here. What did you guys find?
So we had a moment where we realised that the strengths of one system or one approach were probably the weaknesses of the other. So there's a bit of crossover, but under strengths we talked about preference being more equitable, especially for students with accessibility issues, and that it's a strength that students have a choice or some sort of role in the process about what they're going to end up with. Direct we actually saw as a strength in some cases because it didn't need to be overcomplicated. If there wasn't actually much choice or things to allocate between, why make it more complicated than it needs to be? Another strength of preference was increased time potentially for thinking and planning and not having to sort of beat the clock to get an outcome. The weaknesses are sort of the flip sides of some of those, but also with direct sort of the stress and anxiety for students, some disappointment if they don't get in or they don't get a chance to get what they want, but that also comes with the preference system as well, potentially if they've taken the time to put the preferences in and then they still don't get what they would like. We found that a weakness of both was that they're not particularly forgiving if you make an accidental mistake or you click as a student, and that there can still be clashes if you're out of sequence or you're trying to avoid clashes between distance and on-campus availabilities. Opportunities with preferences that students can actually be really happy and really shape the outcomes and make them work for them in other non-study areas of life. If we take a step back, both systems are probably better than paper systems, which are still in use at UTAS here and there. And it also is good for the profile of the university because it's, gives an impression of a forward-thinking university that's slick and operates well with its systems. In terms of threats, direct there could be overwhelming of the system or other points in the system. Timetable changes are tricky and can lead to disappointment with both approaches, but that's sort of a general threat there. Yes, and you can sort of undo some of the strengths to students by overwhelming them with emails that are easily missed sometimes, which can ultimately then really annoy students and contribute to attrition, and also increases the time for staff to sort out those issues.
Cool. Okay, those are all really valid, so thanks for sharing with that. What you've just covered is actually what I've seen on most tables. So there's an interesting thing around, I guess, the weaknesses or the threats with direct versus preferential around student expectations. So what we see with direct is there's high anxiety with students, and that anxiety leading up to the allocation moment, it remains high, and they communicate that to each other, and they reinforce that anxiety with each other. But what we see with preferential is disappointment. Because they put their preferences in and not everyone can get their first or second preferences. So there's a trade-off, like do we work with a group of students who are anxious or do we work with a group of students who are disappointed? And there's no good answer, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there is an emotional response with your students to the way they allocate to their timetable. What's also interesting is once the allocation cycle has finished, they don't care about it anymore. That's what our surveying internally does. They've gone through a high stress situation or they've gone through an emotional disappointment reaction, and then they move on with their life and they work with what they've got. One of the threats that we have seen in the past with direct allocations is system crashes, because there's high load, and high load will always create a threat in an IT environment. And it doesn't matter if it's your allocation system or your student enrolment system, there's got to be load in there somewhere. So that's a threat to you. What we also see is, and it's independent of whether you have direct allocations or preferential allocations, is there's a choke point, and that choke point is your student centre. So when a student has a question about their allocation, they will contact the people they're told to talk to. Let's say it's the student centre and not just some random academic out there. So if you release all your allocations at the same time, you're going to crash your phone system, you're going to crash your chat system, and you're going to break your student centre staff. So maybe an opportunity for your university is to stretch that out across a longer period of time so you can inquiry manage. And that's what we've done at ACU. So we used to do it in 3 days across 3 states. Our abandonment rates were 80% in our phones. We've moved to 6 days, so 3 states, 2 days each by faculty, and our abandonment rates are 15%. So we saw that there was a problem. We went through this and we came up with a solution. It does mean that the allocation cycle takes longer, but ultimately we're getting better responses to our students because we're able to answer their questions and they're not getting disgruntled. So that's good. Any last thoughts before we move on to the SWOT analysis for the next part of it? Okay, cool. So what I'd like to look at now, what I should also acknowledge is that not all timetabling teams manage allocations. Some allocations are managed by the student enrolment system, and so the IT team or the student enrolment team manages allocations. And that's actually something that could be the strength or weakness within your institution as well. My take on it is that timetabling builds the timetable, and we should be responsible, this is my take on it, we should be responsible for the outcome when they go through an allocation cycle. And it gives us some really good feedback that when we see students hit our timetable, because we manage allocations, we can say, well, we got it right here, but we got it wrong there. It's just something to think about. Alrighty. So this next SWOT analysis is going to be on the difference between, excuse me, the same time enrolment and allocation. So a student enrolls in their units and allocates to their classes at the same time, compared to enrolling at one moment and allocating at another moment. Got any questions about that? Okay, got a frog in my throat. Go for it. So you've got 10 minutes or so to do that. It's a really, really good point. Really good point. What we see with our enrolment numbers is that 50% enroll before December, 25% enroll 2 days before we open the allocation system. So students are telling us through their behaviour that the allocation is really important to them. They don't care about the late fee, they do care about selecting their class. So that's a good point. That's okay. Where do you at?
Well, I think
Oh, no, agree.
You all agree? Perfect. Like if you, okay, so let's just talk about separate. So if you have students enrolling and you have an allocation later, it will impact your enrolment pattern. So if you think about your returning students, universities build their entire plan around their enrolment load. So if you don't know what your enrolment load is, you don't know if you're hitting your plan. So if you open up enrolments in October, but they're not really signing in to, and they're not enrolling until February because they know they don't have to, because that's when it's really important, then you really don't know what's happening. Now, if you've got semester 2 and you're not really opening up allocations until June, you'll see your semester 2 enrolments just dribble along at about 10% a month. So it's not really until August that your university knows if you hit your enrolment plan. So that's, no, that's right. There's no real advantage. I mean, it helps them if they like to know what they're enrolled in, but there's no timetable advantage. So the threat there is, or the weakness actually, is that you don't know your enrolment plan. But if you have, for example, enrolments and allocations happening at the same time, the threat to that I mean, the strength is that you know your enrolment plan, but the threat to that is you're not going to be as nimble when it comes to changing your timetable based on your enrolment load. So adding extra classes, opening extra spaces. So you've got a threat that you're not going to be able to let those students allocate. So then you have to think about, do we do preferential and direct? Because we actually want to give ourselves some breathing space. So we'll let them allocate and pick a preference, but that gives us 2 weeks to go, well, we can see we've messed up here, we need to move that around. So that's an opportunity. But it's complicated. It is complicated. Yep. All right. We'll next time. All righty, so we'll just bring it back in and we'll just discuss what you found. And you guys can sit it out this time. But you've actually better prepared. That's good, that's good. I'm going to pick this group over here because they were having some very interesting conversations to perhaps tease out a couple of things that you found. And now we go like, not me, don't pick me. Alrighty. So we're talking about the SWOT analysis of same time enrolment allocations versus separate enrolment allocations. What did you guys find? What did you find?
Well, because we don't have any changes post-publication with same time.
I'll just get everyone else to quieten down a bit, please.
With the same time allocation, then the students know right at the start, right when they're enrolling, this is what my timetable is, this is what I'm doing, this done, gone.
That's if you've got no changes.
Which, we don't have.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm being facetious. We have changes, but
that's good, because what you are saying is that changes to your timetable after enrolments and allocations is a threat.
Yeah, it is, and what we I think what we collectively identified is that the largest threat by staff is the teaching staff, or the employment of specifically casual teaching staff, because I can't teach that. You have to change it. It's like, well, just teach what we're paying you to teach, but.
No, you're hitting the nail on the head there. One of the biggest weaknesses and threats of having your allocations and your enrolments at the same time is that you do not have the opportunity to massage your timetable into something which is a bit more stable. That's fine. I'm happy to talk about that. But of course, the flip side is that students have a chance to plan based on a fairly stable timetable. They can then talk about their work commitments and their family caring commitments, because gone are the days where you can laugh it up on AusStudy and swan around surfing all the time. You have to work, and you have to look after your family. And so students say they want to plan early, and if you're enrolling and allocating early, you've got a better planning cycle. But there's a trade-off. And the pendulum really sits between, do we have no changes because that's what students want, or do we have changes because that's the reality of working in a large institution with thousands and thousands of teaching staff? So it's good. Okay, thank you. You guys, what do you got?
Okay, all right. That was our bigger point, the thing about the data and being able to use the data for the separate times. But strengths for same time would be there's fewer points of contact for the students, so get it over and done with, they're in and they're done. An opportunity that I kind of like for separate time is that it means that students can basically select based on the content, not based on the timetable. So they're not looking at it and saying, oh, it's a Friday afternoon, I don't want to do that. They're looking at it and say, yes, I do want to do that. And of course, then the timetable comes out that it's on Friday afternoon and maybe they just change their mind again. But I think it does give them that opportunity, takes the timetable out of that decision.
I was going to say, just to expand on that a little bit. We as timetablers tend to talk about timetabling churn. So we say when the timetable moves, it's churn. But there's a couple of other churns that we don't really have a look at. There's enrolment churn, so students changing their enrolment patterns. We don't really see that, and we don't really see how that impacts on the timetable. And then there's class allocation churn. I don't like that day, but I know if I wait and wait and wait, a class will, like a spot will open up in that class, and I'll jump to that. So there's actually 3 tiers of churn going on. Some of it's to do with the timetable. Some of it's to do with choices around what they prefer. Some of it's to do with how they're going to course complete. But we can control only the timetable. So it's interesting. Okay.
And of course, if the system we use at UNSW to some extent tries to solve that though, because the student selects the course, and then to some extent we give them the timetable that works for that course. I think that was all we really had, other than, I mean, if the separate has a time lag component there, which is frustrating for students, I think. I mean, it's sort of the multiple points of contact they have to have with the system.
I think somebody was talking about this yesterday, and it might have been even the person who introduced the whole conference, is that students are measuring our service compared to banks, compared to airlines. And what I feel with the way that we're delivering it is that we're not delivering a seamless experience. We're saying you can enrol at any point from October. We'll give you a timetable sometime in November, and then in February you can allocate to your classes. And so we've really created this situation where it's kind of like 5 or 6 months to do something really that a student probably wants to do just like that. So our take on this is that the separate enrolment and allocation cycle with the timetable on a different date as well creates a weakness in the student experience, but it also creates a threat to our university, because students can go and look at other universities, go, oh, look, they're offering the same unit, but at a time that I want to do, I'm going to change my enrolments. And the barrier, the economic barrier to change institutions these days is almost nothing. So how you retain your students through choices that you make around enrolment and allocations is really critical around the edges, because we're talking 4, 5, 6, 7% of our enrolments that are drifting around to other institutions because they're making choices based on, well, that institution, if I enroll, I can get a timetable that suits my needs. So there's a threat. But of course, there's a threat if you have same time enrolments and allocations, because it happens so fast, you don't know if your timetable is actually the timetable that's going to suit the enrolment load, because it's coming in fast. I think an answer to this is preferential allocations, because it gives you breathing space. They enrol, they put their patterns together, they're selecting what they think they want, and you've got a couple of weeks to go, well, I can see we've got some load issues here, we're going to talk about adding classes or taking classes away. So there's no one approach, there really isn't. Any last thoughts on this aspect?
We also had that having a same time enrolment and allocation process might be disadvantaged international students.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question, because I was talking to our international team the other day, and what I found out is that they don't allow our international students to enrol until O week, because they want to guide them through that enrolment process and allocation process. Now, how the schools deal with that is they buffer down a couple of places and they keep them there. But you'd have to do that for all your classes. You know, in a unit that's got 60 classes, are you willing to buffer down 2 or 3 spots in 60 classes so your international students can get something that suits them? That's not my decision. That's the international team's decision.
Don't they want to lock them in?
That's a great question. My answer is yes.
We lock them in
Yep.
into a class,
Yep.
of course,
That's right.
as soon as possible.
So my take on that is, why are you treating our international students differently to our domestic students? You really, in my mind, want to lock that student in earlier because they bring 3 times as many fees. I'm not saying that ACU does it the right way. I'm just saying that that's what we do, and there's definitely some threats and opportunities there.
Does anybody use reserve flags?
Yeah, we do.
Obviously, we can do that with sometimes we go on all the international students in like 1 or 2 classes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Also, we might do that on courses as well. We might have the places so for a class from a particular course, because the tutor that we want to get on that might focus that learning more on what they're coming from.
True. That's exactly right. What I'm going to do, because we're time poor, is move on to our last SWOT. So our last SWOT is the concept of annual timetable versus term-by-term timetabling. Now, I know in Asperg, we've been talking about this for like, well, forever. But in the context of class allocations, it actually does matter. If you're talking about some of the things that we've already talked about, then this is actually a decision that will impact on your strategy around class allocations. So I want you to spend a few more minutes pulling apart the advantages, disadvantages, threats, opportunities of an annual timetable versus a term-by-term timetable.
The strength is knowing, so yes, definitely, yes, that's, it's staggered, but less downtime.
So we've actually started this year.
Do you get better data though? Do you? So, like what we're not talking about is rolled versus rebuild. So now in a rolled timetable, you've got the best timetable at the end of the cycle and you roll it, or do you go back and rebuild it? And because you rebuild it the way you think is the best way, is it really going to meet their needs? And I can tell you, every time we rebuild it, gets churned because we think we're right and they have a completely different desire. People don't like 8 o'clock, so we're going to move it to 9 o'clock. The roads are icy in Ballarat after 5 o'clock. We're going to move everything. There's no good answer to this.
I mean, with the timeline from planning to teaching is longer.
It is.
So if they change their minds or they have a new, I mean, it's like you said, better staff data, right? Because with academics change.
The weakness here is that it's a long lead time. There's a long lead time for that information
A lot of it's stable, though, right? I mean, how much of the courses are stable in terms of...
Well, this is a really good question, and in a growth cycle, there's no stability in your course structure because schools are throwing ideas out there and going, we need a new course because we need to attract the market. What we're now seeing is that is actually flattening off because there's less opportunity to attract new students, so you can consolidate on your core business. But you know, these are business strategies, and I think that our business strategies actually impact what we do when it comes to these sorts of things. I'm going to ask you guys to present this one. Alrighty, so we're going to just do a bit of sharing now. So this group over here are going to share first. The old bugbear around annual versus term by term, but I don't think you can actually consider this decision in isolation. I think that you've already seen that there's a whole bunch of factors that come into a decision like this. So what did you guys just talk about?
So we talked about in the strengths that an annual timetable allows the students to sort of plan their whole year out in one go, and they will see everything whereas we also thought for when you're doing it term by term, students perceive that as a strength that they're not seeing their second semester till later, and they most probably perceive that as being more stable. We don't necessarily think it was that, but we're just saying that's what we felt the students.
Because they don't see the churn.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but we all know it doesn't matter which way you do it, there's always churn anyway.
Yep.
So,
that's valid.
So opportunities is that we thought that having an annual timetable encourages the academics to plan earlier. You know, we say encourage, whatever, because we put in the brackets that academics fail to plan, but that's for both. both of them anyway. If we have an annual timetable, we thought that helped us, maybe we had more time to identify issues with locations, and you're sort of giving a single deadline that everybody has to get this information to you so that then you can do your next jobs, and so that sort of forces everybody to work towards one set of deadlines.
Yep.
And then it doesn't feel so grey.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So we thought as well that one of the weaknesses from the term by term was that the timetabling staff really don't get any real downtime.
Yep.
They're constantly working on the next
Yep.
bit, but they're still working on the old one as well.
When they have downtime in my team, I give them to admissions and exams because, like, you know, we're not doing anything.
Holidays, people have holidays.
Oh, that.
To be taken, a lot
Yep,
of
no, that's
service
fine.
leave.
No, that's fine. No, those are really good points.
And we also thought that course offerings may change
Yes.
more in term by term.
Yes.
And things could be missed as well was a weakness that, I forgot about that because you're not looking at it as a whole year. And then that also led into threats that students may not be able to complete, graduate, and that student experience because people are not looking at the whole year and making sure that the student can do everything they need to do. And then again, stable timetable came into threats again, which it will always be that. You always have change.
Yep. All those points are exactly right. Because we've got a little bit of, we're going to rush a little bit. Does anyone have last thoughts on annual versus term by term that, like, I really want to share it? Come on, I know you do. We're looking at an annual rolled timetable with allocations and enrolment at the same time with preferential for returning students, with first year students having a forced timetable. That's where we're going.
So a forced
That's what they do in the UK.
Yep. So the reason that we're talking a forced timetable for commencing students is that that's their experience in grade 11 and 12. And in orientation, there's just so much going on. Do we really want to burden them with a timetable question? But of course, in any of these cycles, we will give students choice because once we give them their timetable, they can then change the timetable to suit their needs based on what's available. So we're not saying that we're locking you in, you can't change, but that's the approach that we're looking at. And we're doing that because we're moving into a constrained environment. We're moving into a downturn in the sector. We know that. We've seen it in our 17-18 numbers, and we've seen it in our 19 numbers, and we're about to go through, another cycle, and we're probably going to see it in our 2020 numbers. So maybe it's just ACU that's seeing that contraction, but we're trying to get in front of that because we also understand that the very large universities, as they contract, they will take our students because they're more attractive. So when they start taking their ATARs down, that will take our students, and we need to think about how we get in front of that. Yeah. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's right.
Have you looked at any of the numbers of students that don't complete class registration?
Oh, they just get forced into whatever. Like, we just force them. If you don't want to make a choice, we'll make a choice for you.
Is it across the board, or is it campus driven, like you noticing more campus?
Oh, that's a really complicated question. It changes. I mean, that's one of the advantages of being a national university is that when we see soft market in Victoria, we can make more offers in New South Wales. So we actually have that's an ACU advantage that we've got in front of all the other universities. So we will see if there's a change to how education students are going to get in because they've raised the ATAR, then we change a different state or we change a different course. So, ACU is quite a unique university, but it is what it is. And I don't want to sound flippant when I say we force them, but we've given them enough choice. And then there's a point where we need to get them into their classes. There's operational reasons for it. Alrighty, I just want to quickly touch on some tools. So we've done some SWOT analysis. And when I put all this together, I'll give it back to you. And I want you to think about how you actually use that information. So these are some useful questions when you do a SWOT analysis. Is how can you maximise your strengths? How can your weaknesses be minimised? How can the opportunities be taken advantage of? And how can you get rid of these threats? Because threat avoidance is actually a very important way to approach things. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is using lean methodology. Now, lean methodology is a fantastic tool, and what I've got here is in lean methodology there are 8 wastes, and this is the take from an education perspective. So without going deeply into lean methodology, if you think about something simple like a student can enrol in October, they get their timetable in November, and they can allocate in February. That's considered a time waste. because we've stretched out the entire time that it takes to do that particular cycle. So that's how you might apply lean methodology to your current situation. Communication, if you're talking about an annual timetable, the communication is, well, what you've solved, hopefully, is that you have told everybody in your institution this is what your year looks like. And you have communicated in one go instead of multiple goes, what the timetable looks like. So lean methodology is fantastic, and I would recommend that you get deep into it because you can apply it at all levels. If you've got a form that you need to be filled out and it goes and gets signed by one person, then signed by another person, and you can't do anything until those two signatures are in place, lean methodology will look at that and say that's a waste. You have created waste in your process. So that's a useful tool. And then the last one I would suggest that you do is the so what game. Now in our society, when you go so what, someone thinks you're being rude, but that's not what this is about. So what is actually asking a question on like, why do we do something? And if your answer is just because, then you need to look at that because you haven't really answered the so what question. If you can't justify your process or your approach to a so what question, then it's probably not as strong as it possibly could be. So it's a way for organisations to actually challenge their assumptions and their processes by just asking a really simple question. So what? Why do we do that? So what? And it's not a personal attack. It's a question that you ask about, what you're doing, is it robust? So that's the workshop. I hope that was of value to you. And thank you for coming through that so quickly. And there was a lot of content in there, so it was really valuable for you to go through that. And I hope you got something out of it. I will take away your answers and I'll put them together and I'll give them back to you because it's your work. Okay? Thank you.